The champagne glass trembled slightly in Clara's hand as the wedding guests waited for her to speak. "I still can't believe she came." The whisper drifted somewhere behind her. Another voice lowered carefully. That was supposed to be Clara beside him. Clara kept her eyes forward even as the words settled heavily in her chest. Across the room, Ethan sat beside her younger sister with one hand resting gently against Lena's waist, while guests smiled around them like this was the love story everyone had hoped for. And maybe for Lena it was. But 3 months ago, Ethan had still been coming home to Clara. More eyes slowly turned toward her now, some sympathetic, some curious, some quietly waiting to see whether she would break in the middle of the reception. The microphone was placed softly into her hand. For one brief second, Clara considered giving it back and walking out before another person looked at her with pity disguised as kindness. But then Lena looked at her. Her little sister's eyes were already filled with tears. And Clara stayed. The room slowly quieted around her, but the story did not start there. It started on a rainy Thursday evening in Clara and Ethan's apartment. Clara had barely stepped through the front door before she noticed the silence, the dark television, and the absence of dinner in the kitchen. Just Ethan sitting at the edge of the couch with both hands clasped tightly together. "You okay?" she asked softly. Ethan looked up immediately. She slowly set her bag down near the door. "What happened?" Ethan stood before she fully reached him. For a second, he looked like he wanted to speak and couldn't. Then, finally, "I don't think I'm in love with you the way I used to be anymore." The words settled quietly between them. Rain tapped softly against the windows while Clara stared at him without moving. "How long have you known?" she asked carefully. Ethan looked away briefly. "A while." Clara nodded faintly to herself. The delayed smiles suddenly made sense, the distracted silences, the way Ethan sometimes looked emotionally somewhere else, even while sitting beside her. "Is there someone else?" she asked softly. Ethan hesitated, and Clara felt something inside her quietly collapse. He stepped toward her slightly. "I never wanted to hurt you." Tears filled Clara's eyes immediately, but she blinked them back before they could fall. For a few seconds, neither of them moved. Ethan looked like he wanted to say something else. Clara didn't give him the chance. She walked past him quietly toward the bedroom while the apartment remained painfully still around them. Ethan followed a few steps behind. "Clara." She opened the closet and reached for her overnight bag without looking at him. "Please don't do that thing where you suddenly start sounding gentle now," she said softly. Ethan went silent immediately. Clara folded clothes with trembling hands before placing them into the bag too quickly and without care. A sweater slipped from her grip onto the floor. Ethan instinctively bent to pick it up. "I've got it," Clara whispered quickly. He froze. The room fell quiet again. Clara swallowed carefully, lifted the bag onto her shoulder, and walked past him toward the front door. Ethan turned slightly. "It wasn't planned." Clara stopped briefly near the doorway, but she never looked back. "That doesn't really help right now." Then she opened the door and stepped out into the rain. 20 minutes later, Clara stood outside Lena's apartment while rain soaked through her coat. The moment Lena opened the door, Clara's composure disappeared completely. "Oh my gosh," Lena whispered, pulling her inside immediately. Clara tried speaking twice before the tears finally came. Lena wrapped both arms around her instantly while Clara cried against her shoulder. "What happened?" Lena asked softly. Clara shook her head. "I think there's another woman." The words hit Lena so hard she almost stopped breathing. Clara pulled away just enough to wipe at her face. "He didn't say it," she continued quietly. "But you can feel these things." Lena looked down quickly before Clara could fully read her expression. "Maybe you're wrong," she said softly, but guilt had already entered her voice. Clara sat down slowly on the couch while Lena brought her water with trembling hands. I kept trying to figure out what changed, Clara admitted quietly. Lena sat beside her carefully. You didn't do anything wrong. The response came too quickly. Clara looked at her for a moment before nodding faintly. That night, Lena stayed beside her until Clara finally fell asleep against the couch cushions sometime after midnight. A month later, Clara had started learning how to exist around the emptiness Ethan left behind. Some mornings, she still reached for her phone before remembering there was no reason to text him anymore. Other nights, she stood in grocery store aisles, staring at things Ethan liked before quietly putting them back. Then one evening, Lena called, asking if she could come over. Her voice sounded strange. When Clara opened the apartment door later that night, Ethan stood beside her sister. Everything inside Clara immediately tightened. No one spoke at first. Lena looked terrified. Ethan looked pale. And suddenly, Clara understood before either of them said a word. Oh. The sound barely left her lips. Lena's eyes filled immediately. Clara, you're together? Silence answered first. Then Lena stepped forward carefully. We didn't mean for this to happen. Clara looked between them slowly. Lena kept trying to tuck her left hand slightly behind her arm. Then Clara's eyes dropped instinctively toward Lena's hand. The ring. For a second, she stopped breathing. You're engaged? Lena started crying immediately. We were going to tell you sooner. Clara stared at the ring again, like her mind was struggling to catch up. Just weeks ago, she had still been crying over the breakup, still trying to understand what happened. And now they were standing in front of her, already planning forever. Ethan finally spoke quietly. I'm sorry. Clara looked at him for a long moment before answering. Please stop apologizing like it changes anything. The room fell silent again. Lena wiped desperately at her tears. I know this is horrible. Clara almost laughed at that. Horrible? She repeated softly. Lena, I thought you were about to tell me you started dating. Lena covered her mouth immediately as another sob escaped her. And despite everything hurting inside her, Clara still moved toward Lena automatically, pulling her into a hug and comforting her the same way she always had. The wedding planning started 2 weeks later, and somehow Clara stayed through all of it. One afternoon, Lena stood in front of the mirror during a dress fitting while the seamstress adjusted the fabric around her waist. Do you think it's too simple? Lena asked softly. Clara looked up from the couch. No, she answered quietly. It looks like you. Lena smiled at her reflection for a moment before her expression slowly faded. You don't have to keep doing this if it's hurting you. Clara adjusted the sleeve folded neatly across her lap before looking back at her sister. I know. But she stayed anyway. By the time the wedding day finally arrived, Clara moved through the afternoon quietly, answering questions she barely heard while guests filled the venue around her. Still, she showed up, because Lena was still Lena. And despite everything that had happened, Clara loved her more than she hated the pain. The room slowly stood as the music began. Then Clara looked up. Lena appeared at the end of the aisle, holding their mother's bouquet with trembling hands. For a second, she looked overwhelmed enough to stop walking completely. Then her eyes found Clara. Relief crossed Lena's face immediately because Clara was still there, watching her with the same reassuring smile she had given her her entire life. Lena's expression crumpled with emotion before she finally continued walking toward Ethan. Somewhere behind Clara, whispers drifted quietly through the crowd. That should have been her. I still don't understand how she's surviving this. Clara kept her eyes ahead as the ceremony passed in soft blurs filled with vows, applause, and music she barely heard. Later that evening, someone placed a champagne glass into Clara's hand, while another guest gently passed her the microphone. And suddenly, the ballroom slowly quieted around her. Clara lifted the microphone carefully, while guests turned their attention toward her. Lena looked emotional already. Ethan looked tense in the quiet way he always did when guilt caught up to him unexpectedly. Clara swallowed carefully before speaking. "When Lena was little," she began softly, "she used to climb into my bed every time it stormed." A few guests smiled quietly. She thought thunder meant something terrible was about to happen. Lena laughed weakly through tears. "And every single time," Clara continued, "she'd ask me if things were going to be okay." The room slowly grew still. Clara finally looked toward her sister. "You've always loved people fully," she said softly, without holding back. Lena lowered her gaze immediately. "And you deserve someone who protects that softness." Ethan looked down for a moment. Clara lifted her glass slowly. "To Lena and Ethan." Glasses lifted around the room. Applause followed a few seconds later. As conversation slowly returned around the room, Clara lowered the microphone carefully and stepped away from the center of the reception. Later that night, after most of the guests drifted back toward the dance floor, Clara quietly stepped outside onto the terrace alone. The doors behind her opened softly a few moments later. Lena stepped outside, still holding part of her dress carefully as she walked. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Lena's face crumpled almost immediately. "I hate that this hurt you." Clara looked at her quietly, taking in how beautiful Lena looked tonight, and how happy she seemed somewhere underneath all the guilt. Lena stepped closer slowly. "Please don't disappear from my life after this." Clara reached up gently and fixed a loose strand of hair behind Lena's ear, the same way she had since Lena was 16. Then she smiled softly. "I think I need a fresh start." Lena frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" Clara looked away briefly before answering. "I applied for a job overseas a few weeks ago," she said quietly. "They offered me the position." Lena's face immediately fell apart. "You're leaving?" Clara nodded once. "I can't stay here right now." Lena started crying immediately, and Clara pulled her into one final embrace while music drifted faintly behind them from inside the ballroom. A week later, Clara stood alone inside an airport terminal with her luggage beside her. People moved around her, dragging suitcases toward departure gates, while boarding announcements echoed through the airport overhead. Clara tightened her grip slightly around her passport and looked up at the departure screen one more time. Her phone buzzed. Lena. "I love you. Please don't stop loving me too." Clara stared at the message for several seconds before finally typing back. "Never." Then suddenly her knees gave out beneath her. She sank down onto the floor beside her suitcase as tears finally spilled down her face. For the first time since the wedding, she stopped trying to hold herself together. One hand covered her mouth as the sobs finally came harder now, her shoulders shaking as she cried there on the airport floor.